This podcast contains potentially adult language, adult themes, definitely drinking, and possibly sexual context. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to Drinking with Authors, the podcast. I'm your host, Erica Lance. My co-host today is the amazing C.R. Rice. And our guest today is Bernadette Walsh. Woo! Okay, so please like and subscribe. Here's a couple things I'm adding in. I made myself.
I was about to say, wait a second.
Yeah, please like and subscribe. If you leave a review, we would love you. We love reviews. It's how people find us, so please do that. I do want to thank all of our listeners, and if you're an author out there and would like to be on the show, email us at drinkingwithauthors@gmail.com. And if you're just a listener and want us to interview your favorite author, send us who you'd like us to talk to. We will hunt them down like a dog and get them on this podcast. We get all the people. So anyway, okay, and we'd like to thank our sponsors, Koch Brothers Spirits. DWA10 is our coupon code. And I'm having a little bit of whiskey on my drink, so I'll describe what I'm drinking. I decided in my epic Star Wars mug, I'm doing a hot toddy. Because believe it or not, yes, a hot toddy. They're very nice, and I was honestly taking a daytime nap just a little while ago, so I needed to clear my vocals. But I have Skunk Brothers Spirit whiskey in here. A hot toddy is warm water, lemon, honey, and whiskey. So that's what I'm drinking. Sierra, what are you drinking?
I am back on my vodka and green tea kick because I'm trying to be healthy. You know, I let it slide for a bit, so I got to get healthy again.
I like it. Vodka, green tea. Many would say that was healthy, and then many doctors would ask us not to say that on the air. So either way. Bernadette, what are you drinking?
Oh, I'm so boring. I'm having a seltzer, but we can pretend it's a beer because it makes a nice little sound. So let me do it. That sounds a little more exciting, right?
No, seltzers are good too. What flavor seltzer are we having?
It's a mandarin orange. So, and you know what's so weird about seltzer? Like, I think a lot of people started drinking it during the pandemic. I'd always drank seltzer, and now you can't sometimes find it in the supermarket. So,
I think it tastes like bad water. I can't even do tonic water. Like Corey loves it. I can't do it.
I will say honestly, in my Drinking with Authors swag, you'll get some of this, Bernadette. I am drinking lime seltzer water in there. You see me? Look how citrusy I am today.
Yes, I see.
Oh, that's hot. Okay. Bernadette, can you tell the audience that may not know what you write?
Well, I write a little bit of everything. I know that the publishing industry says you should pick a genre and stick with it. And I guess my inner rebel has expressed itself in my writing career because I really have hopped around genres. I started out writing, I wrote a contemporary romance. This was my first book called Gold Coast Wives. And it was a cute, fun, my first attempt at writing. And it was very light and a lot of fun. And it was actually originally published by Lyrical Press, which is now part of Kensington. And I thought that's where my sweet spot was going to be. But then I kind of took a turn, and I always loved witches and vampires. So I said, well, why don't I try paranormal romance? So I wrote a 4-book paranormal romance called The Devlin Witch. And that was also originally published by Lyrical Press, but I've since gotten my rights back. But then I took another turn in my writing journey, and I started doing more women's fiction. And that's really been, for the most part, my sweet spot. I've done primarily women's fiction. One of my books here is called Johnny Be Good. My latest release was called Safe Distance, and it was based on the pandemic. A woman, really 2 families on Long Island, I'm from Long Island, who live in a cul-de-sac. And because of the pandemic, and my pandemic was actually much worse than the real pandemic because I was writing it during the pandemic, kind of like when we didn't know where it was going to go. So my imagination ran wild. So it was a little more dramatic than our fairly dramatic pandemic. But that was a story about friendship, frenemies, two families, how they, intertwined, and there's some love and with the wrong people going on. And that was the latest book I wrote. But I have done a couple more paranormal romances as well. I do like women's fiction. I tend to address kind of meaty topics, and sometimes they're very draining afterwards. So I kind of do my heavy duty women's fiction, and then to kind of cleanse my palate, I'll do like a romance or paranormal novella. So that's been my writing journey. I'm sorry?
What is women's fiction?
Women's fiction can be anything you want it to be, right? I think the primary definition is that it's about the protagonist is usually a woman, and it's about the woman's journey. So there's some women's fiction that's a little closer to the contemporary romance, and then there's some where there's no romance. So I think it runs the gamut. Like I think Jodi Picoult, I think would be considered women's fiction. Kristen Higgins has now moved into the women's fiction arena.
No, that makes sense. So Bernadette, when did your first book come out? The very first one?
2010.
Okay, and that was traditionally published, right?
Yes. That was with Lyrical Press, that is now part of Kensington. So I was with Kensington for a bit.
Does it come with?
God, that makes sense. Yeah, your background is fun there. CR. Anyway, it's okay. So then you but now you said you got your rights back. Are you self-published?
Yes, now I'm self-published. I think I kind of, I drank the Kool-Aid where it came to self-publishing. So I got my rights back, and, maybe that was the best decision. Maybe it wasn't. I'm a little bit of a control freak. So I think it kind of worked with me. And so this way I could I change my covers, I can do different kinds of promotion. And so I'm still thinking about doing traditional publishing, but I think what hurts me a little bit is that I write what's passionate and what I'm really interested in at the time, and I don't really stick with the genre, as I said. So right now I'm self-publishing, and it's working out for me.
No, I think that's great. There's a lot of people that go a traditionally published route. I'm doing quotations. If you're watching YouTube, you see that. But I think it ends up that some people, for that reason, or they get in bad situations where it's not a partnership with the publishing company to do what they want. So you end up stuck with certain things. And also, so a lot of times they want you to stay in a lane. They want you to pick a lane, and they want you to stay in a lane. And more, I think people aren't necessarily staying in a lane. And I don't think you have to. I think there are certain, for instance, you can't publish erotica books under the same name you publish any kind of children's book, right?
Yes, that would be bad.
Because if the parental units give the child access and go, oh, you can buy any of Bernadette's books, it's fine. And you got a bunch of YA stuff, and then all of a sudden it's like sexy man, and then they're like, what is this? And then that's when they have a problem with it. But other than that, I think that more and more it's being opened up because of self-publishing and publishers that are like, no, if you don't have to stay in a box, you're good, you can get out of that box. What made you decide to write in 2010 though? What made you go, you know what, I'm going to do this now?
Well, I talked about writing, I think, my whole life, but I never did it. I always felt like I didn't have the time. In my day job, I'm a lawyer. So that obviously in my, 20s and early 30s, I was very, very focused on my education and then that career. And so I waited until I got married. I had a small child. So I had a small child, was married, was working, had absolutely no time. But I was creeping up on 40. And I kind of had one of these, if not now, when? And so my husband actually bought me a computer, and he said, look, this is just your writing computer. You don't associate it with work. Just do it. And so of course, being a lawyer, I decided to do some research. And so I read everything I could about writing a book. And then I hooked up with a local writing group. called the Long Island Romance Writers. And so that's why I think I started off in the romance genre, because that's kind of where I learned the nuts and bolts of writing. And then I did get that publishing contract. And, I am actually very, very grateful to that publishing contract, because I think it would have been really hard to just come out of the box and do self-publishing, especially at that time, because I think around 2010-ish, it was just really starting to heat up. So I had the benefit of working with an editor, learning how they design. I saw how they design covers. And so I really did learn an awful lot from that experience. So, as I said, I really had no time to write. So, but I would carve out little bits of my day. And I live on Long Island and I work in New York City. So I had a long commute. So a lot of times I would just be I'd write on the train. I'd write when I was dropping my daughter off to her little dance class. Anytime I could find time to write, I did. And so, I didn't have big blocks of time, but I would add a little page, and eventually it turned into a book. And then, now I am 12 books in.
That is, well, you're a lawyer, so you were writing a lot anyway. Lots of words. Being a lawyer, you get lots of words you get to use with all the things that you have to write. That is really, I think that's really interesting. When did you decide so you do the room, you're starting, and then you go, you know what, I'm going to do this different. When that decision came into place, was it more just what you're inspired by and you're like, this is what the next thing is on my palate that I want to eat?
That's exactly it, because I think you learn with each book. And you learn who you are in each book. And I think I just heard, they talk about your voice, right? Your author voice. And I'm like, I'm always like, what is that? When I was a writer, I was like, when I was just a reader, what does that mean? But I think I grew into my writer voice. And it's funny, a lot of people say what you just said was like, oh, you're a lawyer, so that must have helped you in terms of becoming a writer. And it's true, I am very, words are in my toolbox, but I almost had to learn how not to write like a lawyer. So for example, when I first started writing, my first attempt was about as exciting as a contract. Like, it was beyond dry. It was just horrible. And I was like, what am I doing wrong? But I think because when I'm a lawyer, I'm distanced, it's, from my subject matter. And so I almost needed to kind of dive into the character. So that's why that influenced my writing style, because I only write from the first person. And it's because I needed to be in the character and kind of break down, everything I had spent all that money learning in law school. So, so that's, like I said, it helped. I think what helped me from being a lawyer was like a lot of the editing. Like, I do a lot of my own editing, because that's, I could have a little distance from it, and it's more my day-to-day job. But I think in terms of the creative part of it, being a lawyer didn't help. It was a hindrance.
No, I think it helps you being able to have speed of typing.
Yes.
And being able to do a word count. I say that because I have friends that are lawyers and stuff. And when they, they're always like, I'm going to do fiction. I'm like, why don't we start with a short story, my friend, and see if you can use adjectives and adverbs to describe something. Because you don't. And it's really funny to see, because they do tend to, like, the first round, no matter how creative the story is, comes out sounding like, they just wrote a contract or just wrote a, emotion. And I'm like, this is cool, not compelling stuff the way you're used to, like, this is a compelling motion.
Yes, exactly. And actually my first, because everyone, their first book is usually somewhat autobiographical. And so Gold Coast Wives, which was my first book, was about a woman who was in her 40s, and that's how old I was at the time. And she was working in a law firm. And I had a chapter or two about her summer associate days, how she became a lawyer. And my editor at the time was just like, this is very well written, but the reality is no one cares about your summer associate experience. No one cares, like, that's not part of your story. What is your story about? I was like, oh, it's about this woman who divorced her husband and finds love. And she goes, okay, so, like, talking to her secretary or doing whatever, right? Writing a motion, that's not the part of the story. So
People
I actually
want to know how to do that. They want to know how she fell in love.
Yeah.
Hard.
Unless the person she fell in love with was part of her summer internship and then gets rekindled, then you can bring all that stuff back in.
Yes.
But it has to move the story forward. Nobody cares if you had
Absolutely.
coffee every day during your summer internship.
Yeah.
You know, no, it's really interesting. So what surprised you when you first got published? Like, what surprised you then versus when you self-published? What surprised you?
Well,
I think not anticipating, where you were like, wow, I didn't see this one coming.
I actually got published pretty quickly, and probably it was really, I think, maybe a little too early in my career, because usually you hear about people who write a book and then they like stick it in a drawer and they never like look at it again, because it was like their learning experience. But my learning experience actually got published. It was my first book. And so I think that's part of the reason why I hopped around genres, because although I was over 40, I was in some ways a very immature writer. I had just started on that path. So so I kind of didn't have like a lot of expectations, other than I thought there would be more promotion from the publisher's part. And so I had visions of, doing writing, signing autographs and doing things like that. And they're really, it was a small publisher, and, if they had a budget, they weren't giving it to me. So they did a couple of ads, but there really wasn't a lot done. And so I think that's part of the reason why I wound up taking my rights back, because I felt like I just didn't have any control, and I would have been willing to give up control if somebody else was taking the wheel, but no one was taking the wheel, it felt like. So I think that was one thing I learned. Like I said, the positive was I learned about how a book was put together by watching what the editor did. But I think in terms of promotion, there was just nothing there.
Yeah, and I think that's something, it's good you brought that up, because that is true regardless. It's only like the top, for the publishing company, couple percent that have that promotion granted to them. And sometimes even when it's granted, it's still not enough.
Right.
Like, the number one way books are found, people don't realize this, and this statistic has been true for, I think, going on like 20 years now, but it was looked at 6 years ago, recently renewed, and it is word of mouth. Word of mouth is the number one way people find books. The second way is author platform, right? And so we're not talking about Facebook ads. That's not in the top two reasons they find it. Like, word of mouth and author platform are well over 50% of how people find books. So those two things are required no matter whether or not you have them doing a bunch of marketing for you as well, because it's almost like you have to hit the ground level to do that sort of thing. Which I'm sure you've discovered in self-publishing as well. I don't want anyone to ever think that getting a publishing contract means you don't have to do all that work. Because
no, absolutely. You have to do a lot. And again, I think I got published kind of quickly. So I was a little unprepared for that. I think the other thing I was unprepared for was, when you can't write, because I wrote a couple of books very, very quickly. And somebody said, oh, are you worried about like writer's block? And I'm like, oh, no, not at all. I can just whip these out. And so then.
And then the day came. Then it all ended. And dreaded.
Yes. Well, actually, my writer's block, I had it a little bit, again, when my life got a little busy, unfortunately, my writing had to take a back seat. But when I was back in 2016, I was actually in a car accident, and I had to stop working for a while. I had a very bad concussion. And so, and the neurologist said, well, probably you'll probably be fine, and most of everything will come back within 6 months. And I said, well, what happens after 6 months? He's like, well, the brain's a weird thing. Like, it probably won't come back after that. Some people lose abilities to do things. I was like, oh, okay. So the 6 months went back. I got back to work. I felt like, I was very functional, but guess what I couldn't do? I couldn't write. I could not write at all. It was like that piece of my brain was dead. And I tried, everything was very wooden. And I was like, okay, well, I guess maybe this part of my life is over. And probably about, another 6 months went by, and finally something was happening back there, and I started writing. And it took me 2 years to write this book, Johnny Be Good. But this was the silver lining in that story is I felt like, for whatever reason, I broke through a wall, and I feel like my writing really went to a different level. It went deeper. I tackled, some really, really difficult topics in this book about alcoholism, and it was a very, very personal book. So anyway, I don't know how I got on this, but since then I actually have not had writer's block again. I always am working on something. And I think another silver lining is that now I really treasure my writing ability and treasure that part of my life, because I felt that year when I couldn't write, I was like, I was missing a limb. You know what I mean? I was really missing an important part of myself. So
that is a very cool, triumphant story. That is such an awesome story. That's very cool. It's interesting too, because you said writer's block. And I think a lot of, when I used to think of writer's block many moons ago, I thought like you'd sit there and nothing would come to mind and you'd be looking at a blank paper for a long time. And I think writer's block takes different forms. It doesn't mean that you can't necessarily put words on a page. It just is, what is the quality and quantity of said words? And what is the ideas and how many things need to go into a story graveyard, because whatever you're thinking of is like garbage. It's
yes.
just, and not anybody take offense, garbage, but we all have some ideas.
Everybody has a shitty idea, a bad concept, something that starts out great and then just doesn't.
Falls flat, doesn't go anywhere. Like you're like, well, that was cool. I'm glad I spent a bunch of time writing that.
Yeah, you get to like the 10,000 word mark, that's when you really know, is it going to fly or is it going to just flop? And so, yeah, no, I hear you. It's, but like I said, that was actually a nice story. So I think, look, I think to really be a writer is you have to love what you're doing, right? And whether you find success, and where I've come to is like, I'm very type A in every area of my life. I've tried very hard not to be that type A in my writing world, because I don't want to lose the joy in my writing. So, I'm always looking for an audience. I do shows like this. I actually at one point had my own podcast called Nice Girls Reading Naughty Books, where I was able to connect with people. So I definitely do I try and find readers rather. But I always want to keep the joy in my writing. And my goal is always, how can my next book be better? How can I explore a new part of myself, as opposed to how can I get more downloads?
Oh, I love that. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with Drinking with Authors.
Okay.
Sample locally sourced, quality distilled spirits in the beautiful Columbia River Gorge. At Skunk Brothers Distillery, we're family-owned, brewing small batch grain-to-bottle spirits, just like our grandfather did back in the Prohibition era. From handcrafted bourbons and moonshine to flavored blends and cordials infused with local fruit. Join us for a tasting tour and buy Skunk Brothers spirits straight from the source.
It's all in the family at Skunk Brothers Spirits, located in Stevenson, Washington.
Okay, we're back. I want to talk about we were talking a little bit before we took a break about success. By talking a little bit, you mentioned one thing about it. So how do you measure success? Like, to you, what was your, like, sort of, after the first book, I considered it successful because of A, that sort of thing?
Well, I certainly have not reached the level of commercial success as I would like. I've written some, I think, really good books. I think, hopefully they will find an audience. I know that, the biggest thrill I get is when I get somebody who writes me an email and tells me how much they love my book. I mean, that's amazing to me, because people it's not only a money thing, but it's time, right? Books compete with all kinds of different, pieces of time from people, right? There's Netflix, there's other books, there's, their life, there's lots of things that people can do. And so the fact that they devote a couple of hours to kind of enter my fictional world is a blast. And I'm always very, very grateful for that. So I measure success, again, how do I feel my writing is progressing? Am I always challenging myself? Am I always moving forward? I am not interested in writing formula books. The same thing, boy meets girl and then it's over, or, boy kills girl and then it's over. Like, I really do. I try and inhabit my characters. I try and write what is true to me. And that's my measure of success at this point in my life.
I think that's great. I like the boy.
Such a dramatic change.
I like the boy kills
Boy meets girl, falls in love, or
Let's
boy
just
meets
gloss
girl
over
and kills
that
her.
one. We'll just gloss over the boy kills girl one. And,
Whatever.
yeah. But so do you think that I just got ahead of myself with I maybe put a lot of whiskey in that particular cup. I'm not gonna lie about that. Because Skunk Brothers Spirits is good. I didn't use their single age barrel, just so anyone who's listening doesn't throw a fit at me. My question is, first of all, do you read your reviews? Type A personality, do you read your reviews?
Oh, I do. I don't believe anyone who says that they don't. I, of course, read them. Yes, absolutely.
So how has that been for you? When you got your first review, what was that like?
Well, it's great. I did when I first got back my rights, I did a lot of blog tours, and at that time, like, you'd get a lot of reviews. I think now it's a little harder to get some of those reviews. So it's great when you could tell from the review that somebody really got what you were trying to say. What I find interesting is that sometimes even the good reviews, they'll focus on something that I didn't even mean at all. Like my book, again, The Devlin Witch, which is my sexy romance book, paranormal romance. My books were this book is very much about the women. Like, there's sex and there's, things happening there, but the focus is really on these family of witches and all the, kick-ass things that they do. And so I read one review and they were like, oh, I really loved Bobby. Like, Bobby was so sweet and he was so this and he was so that. Bobby is barely in the book. Like, he gets killed off pretty quick. And I'm like, what? She's like, it was like almost like she was projecting, like the person who wrote the review was projecting everything they want in a man onto Bobby, because like I didn't put it in the page. So that was kind of fun, I guess. I mean, I'm glad she had a positive, experience.
Well, I talk about that though, because I had a character in one of my books that literally was like a barista, and the person came up and was like, oh my God, I love this person, blah, blah, blah. And I, of course, not to them, was like, who? And it was a plot device. I'm sure Bobby was a plot device, right? Like, you need this, the plot device has to have a name. Moving on, and then you're like, what? And they're like, are you going to do Ross story? And I'm like, I literally had to go Control F when I got home to go, who the hell is this?
Who the hell was this?
And I, of course, to the fan, I'm like, oh yeah, no, I always look at, when my next angle is, blah, blah. Who the fuck are they talking about? What is happening?
I know. It's wild. It's wild. I've gotten some reviews. I'm trying to think of some of the bad reviews. So I did get one book, and again, it was this book, which is a very funky book, but it's, again, like none of my book, it doesn't really fit within a romance, right? I mean, I think that's the category I originally picked for it, but it's really women's fiction with witches, right? And so, so I did get, and it's pretty deep. Like, it talks about, like, part of it's set in 9/11. Like, there's some deep stuff there.
That cover, though, my friend, cover definitely put that cover on that book, puts it in a certain little brown there.
Yes, actually, my if you look at the electronic version, because I'm always messing around with my covers, I made it more like, probably like it really is. This probably oversells a little bit, but yeah. So one woman said it was the worst book she ever read. But then you look at the next one, they're like, oh my God, this is amazing. I wish it'd have another story. You know what I mean? So I always read them, but you can't take them too much to heart, I think.
No,
that's something that's really important and people need to understand, is if somebody is having a bad day, like, think about how you feel on a bad day, and like something stupid happens, like the cup you just bought, you dropped it on the floor and it broke, and you go and you write an angry review. Like, reviews a lot of times go based off of how somebody is feeling in that moment. So
that's how they actually perceive the book, what they thought it was. See, some people go into, that's why I mentioned that cover, which I'm glad you tweaked the cover, and we'll have to cyber stalk you, because that cover says to me, steamy romance.
But
Like
there is
Yeah, it
there is
does.
a lot of there is a lot of sex scenes, but I think, and again, this is why I think I've moved away from romance, because I think to be a really good romance writer, I think you have to be a basically optimistic, happy person, and I'm not a optimistic, happy person. So it's always very dark, right? So there was a lot of this happening, for sure. There was a lot of this happening, but they weren't running off into the sunset, right? It was kind of dark. So but you're right. When you cyber stalk me at BernadetteWalsh.com, you can see my new covers, but I happen to have this in my closet. So
no, I think it's great. I'm just as a publisher, I have this cover conversation, and I hope people listening understand you can pick covers, but the problem is you have to look at what other people see. Covers generally for most people are electronic, right? You can't get hardcover or paperback books, yes, but especially in the pandemic, everything was electronic. So you get a little teeny tiny thumbnail, and people know what book covers for types of books they want to read in general look like. They're not that they would consciously say, yes, I know what a cover looks like, but it was funny. I was sitting with a friend of mine who's a writer, and she was scrolling through. She has Kindle Unlimited. I'm not a fan, but she has Kindle Unlimited because she goes through a lot of books that are not great on there, but because she's not paying for them. I think CR also has Kindle Unlimited and goes through a lot of books that are
I go through.
yeah, a surprising amount of not great books. But I was showing covers for something because I was like, these are what the covers need to look like, taking screenshots. And she was like, ooh, that looks like a book I would read. And the moment she said that, like, there was not a truer statement ever as far as book covers, because people see them even in even in stores and stuff. We gravitate because the cover grabs us, and it, you can tell when it's going to be a paranormal romance or a high fantasy book or whatever. Very rarely do I pick up a book and go and turn it over and go, oh, this is a thriller, but it's got a yellow cover with a little happy person walking away. And I'm like, either this blurb is wrong or this cover is wrong, and I'm not sure which it is, but I'm not purchasing that because somebody messed that whole entire thing up there, right?
I will say, as somebody, like she said, that does a lot of Kindle Unlimited, covers are the most, like, it has never been more true as it is nowadays. Do not judge a book by its cover, because people will go out, especially, and I don't mean anything bad about, self-published authors. I get it. Like, you want this, but I went the other day and like saw something that had a really cool clock on it. It was falling apart. It was super, super, nothing to do with the fucking book. Nothing to do with it. Ended up being a romance. Because I do cover roulette, which is a fun little thing I do, where I just swipe down I go to the very end of Kindle Unlimited and I swipe and I pick a book. Be conscientious of your covers. Like, I think it's a very underrated part. Like, people think, you need something that's going to grab somebody's attention, but like she said, like, they look at the cover and they assume what the book is about. If you choose a cover that has nothing to do with anything in your book, you're going to get a bad review, or you're going to get somebody to toss your book, which is a huge thing right now. People fighting like Amazon Unlimited things, or Kindle prices, where they're just like, nope, I didn't actually read that book. It's like, you definitely did, but then they can somehow return it. Just be careful. Like, you're selling something that you put so much time and effort in. Make sure your cover represents what you did.
Right. No, that is absolutely true. And I think one of the good things too, about being self-published is you can change it, right? Like, even this book, Johnny Be Good, which I think this cover actually does represent the genre pretty well. Like, it's women's fiction. It's obviously about a family. But I was thinking, probably about a year in, I was like, I really want something more about the relationship between her and her husband as opposed to her and her son. So in the electronic version, it was very easy. I just did a new cover. And so I have that out. So it's also like how you can kind of test drive it, right? If you feel like, people aren't really necessarily reacting to an element of the story, then you can try a new cover. But, obviously if you're with the publisher, they're not going to give you a cover every time you're a little unhappy. But
As a publisher, that is very true. The other thing though is you have to, if you're able to create covers, which it sounds like you taught yourself how to create covers, yes?
Yes.
Yes? Okay.
I
So
do
that's
both. I like these were actually, I paid for someone to do the covers. It was actually somebody I'd worked with at Lyrical Press. So I used her for, I know that I still use her for some covers, but sometimes if, if I'm unhappy with, or I want to change it up, I do my own. And then, so I have a mixed bag.
Yeah, and that's the other hindrance sometimes for self-published authors though, is that if they don't know how to do it themselves, having to pay for a cover on top of a cover, because cover artists, I love them, but most generally don't go, hey, this is really not genre, whatever, because you're asking them, can you put a this and a this on a cover with a this? And that's what they go do. They go do what you requested them to do. It's knowing and looking and researching. And I love that you talked about having research, because I think that's a step a lot of people don't necessarily take, is that anything you learn to do, period, you're a lawyer, that sort of thing, you have to go educate yourself on it, whether it's a formal education like being a lawyer requires you to do, or I was very much in my field by learning how, from getting certifications and just educating myself constantly. And I think you have to do that, and don't expect that you don't need that underlying knowledge on a topic in order to accomplish that goal. And it's even true with writing. I tell people that all the time. Some people are great out of the gate storytellers, right? And they can write, but writing is hard, and writing takes work, and writing takes a way to guide a person through a story and a way to tell a story, i.e. removing your summer internships, to get the story told. You could have left that in there. Self-published, you could have been like, I'm going to do this. Some people might have been like, I love this part. And other people would have been like, I get with some books where I'm like, where do we get back to the story again? And not like they're on this tangent. What about?
Well, that's why I think it's really important that people continue to educate themselves. Like I used to be a member of Romance Writers Association, RWA, but I'm not a member anymore. But I joined like the Women's Fiction Association. I went away for a weekend and just did, they had a writing conference and learned more there. You have to, and even if you just get a little bit out of each class, like it's just more tools in your toolbox. And the same with, writing covers. Like, well, I was looking at my website and I said, all these covers seem kind of like a mishmash because they were done at different times by different cover artists. So I actually just took them all down and I redid them with like consistent, like the lettering and the colors, so that they looked like the ones that were all women's fiction. They all had some similarities. They looked like a group, not that they were, like orphan children who were thrown together. So, and again, I think I picked that up from a class that I took.
I think it's great you said that, because I talk about that all the time. Like when we're publishing, even if we're publishing a person's work and they have different stories, their name is going to be the same font on every single book, because this is a Bernadette Walsh book. This is a C.R. Rice book. People will look and go, that's this book. Like just by not even reading it, but seeing the cover, they go, this is this author's book. And I think, it's interesting. It's little tricks that you picked up, which not a lot of people pick up all the time, right? And I see covers and they're gorgeous covers, but I'm like, you would never find all these together if you wanted a fan to continue to find you. And especially if there's time between when you're publishing of a magnitude, because, people, romance readers, what do they read? 5 to 10 books a week. So, after week 1, you've lost them. So where are you at with them remembering and going, I know this cover, I think that's a big deal. Okay, let's talk a little bit about fan interaction, because you've been doing this for a while. So before the Rona decided to visit our entire universes, right? Did you do in-person events? How did that go? What was that like for you?
I did some in-person events. Again, I'm a member of a local group, the Romance Writers, Long Island Romance Writers, and then we connected with the Long Island Writers Guild. So there's a couple of writing groups out here in the burbs. So we had a couple of in-person events, libraries, and I think it's kind of a mixed bag. It's funny, I did one library event, and the guy next to me, so it was like all different genres. And so the guy next to me wrote police procedurals, and my dad was like a police officer. So I was talking to him about like what precinct he was from and everything else. But so he had like all these like big husky guys buying his book. His books were like flying off the shelf. And I was like, they didn't even look in my direction. I was like, I wish one of them would bring their wives. Like maybe she would like to read my book. So, like I had a great time like connecting with another author and learning a little bit more about what they did. But, so I've met some fun author friends. I think, it's always nice to talk to people and to sell a few books. But I think I'm going to try and do a little bit more. And I think, again, my writers group, we're going to try now that people are kind of out and about, try and do some more events there. I think a lot of what I did was, I think I'd mentioned I was, in terms of promotion, I had a podcast for several years called Nice Girls Reading Naughty Books. And again, that was great because I met a lot of other authors, but I think that was also a good promotional tool.
What happened to Nice Girls Reading Naughty Books?
You know what? I lost the joy in it a little bit. I had probably done about like 90 podcasts, which is a lot. But I think part of it too is like I started that podcast when I was doing romance writing. And so it just kind of, but given the title, right, I kind of had to keep with the romance. So I wasn't as passionate about romance because I wasn't really writing it anymore. And so I think, and then just other, at a certain point, you can only do so many things in your life. And so, I let it go for a while. So I really loved it. I love to talk. So, part of the reason why I did the podcast was because everyone, it was when I had just was published, and everyone was saying, well, you have to be on Twitter, you have to be on Facebook. And I was like, well, I'm not really a good tweeter. And, I don't know that I'm doing the right, presenting myself in a way, like my tweets kind of seem like everyone else's tweets, but I know I can talk. So that's why I started the podcast. So I think maybe I will resurrect it in another, form, maybe at some point.
I think that's cool. As somebody who's upwards almost of 300 episodes now, and not including when we used to do this in person. It was a ton of fun in person.
Oh, really?
It started as a book club called Critical Drinking. And then the author showed up to the first book club, and it was really weird. We didn't invite them, they just showed up. So, and then it happened again, and we were like, okay, well, we'll just do this differently. But I think it's good because I think, it's funny because we were talking about guests that can be interesting too, especially with the name of your podcast. That had to be really interesting, seeing the difference between the writing the person's doing all hot, steamy, wonderfully, whatever, and then the person who was like plain.
Yes, there was a lot of this going on. It's funny. I would say my best, because most writers have like a day job, right? So I would say some of my most successful interviewers were with teachers. They were because they're used to talking, right? They're used to like walking you through piece and piece. So usually teachers were great. Lawyers were either amazing or horrendous. There was like no in between. So I had one, it was terrible. Like I remember I had one lawyer who was on my podcast, and I used to give people like a list of questions ahead of time. This is one like softball, right? She acted like we were on trial and I was like opposing counsel, and she would like be like, well, why are you asking me that? I was like, oh, I don't know, it's on the list of questions I sent you an hour before. It was just horrible. And finally, like you can always tell like where I wasn't really having a good time, because I would allow for an hour, but some people were only 25 minutes. And so and then there were other people too, like where they were shy, but again, like their, a publisher or whoever told them that they had to do some promotion. And so they were kind of forcing themselves, and they weren't comfortable, because talking to strangers and having your voice be heard by strangers is not an easy thing. So they didn't have, it's not that they weren't nice people, but it just wasn't their thing. So that maybe they should go to tweeting. I think for any like kind of promotion, you really have to find what brings you joy a little bit, something that you enjoy, that you're good at. you can't really, if you force it, it's just not gonna be great. And so that's kind of what happened with my podcast. Like the last few, I was like, I'm not finding the joy in this, and that's going to come across. So I took a little break.
No, it makes sense. Trust me. As we discussed, we've had some episodes that were like, oh my God, what is happening right now? But having the shy, and I want to say this to anybody coming on a podcast too, is that some people are shy, and you are specifically talking about very, behind closed door things, probably with the romance writing and stuff. So somebody who's a shy little librarian type that's writing about, Edgar's torn off shirts and things like that. Now you're putting them on the spot to have to talk about it. Oh, new world. I see that when I go to writers' tables too at conventions and stuff. There are some that are just the most outspoken people. And then there are some when you go to like book fairs and stuff like that, and the romance writers, and you're like, oh, what is your book about? And they're like, well, it's a steamy romance. And the moment these kind of words come out of their mouth, you go, you are going to have a hard time talking about this book, aren't you, my little embarrassed soon to be friend? How naughty does it get? Like, you totally put them on the spot about, like, is it just behind the closed door? Do we get to see what happens under the sheets? And they're like, red, 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 red. And they're like, oh, it's very steamy. Voice changes octaves.
I think Bernadette's super right on that one, because like if you are that type of person, go on to podcasts. Nobody can see you unless you're on Drinking with Others, because we definitely have a YouTube channel. But I mean, if you go to a podcast, nobody knows who you are. You can use your pen name. You can do like a weird pitch to your voice. You can do those fun things. So it makes it different. So like she said, if you don't want to be seen in person talking about it or anything like that, go with that kind of thing. Don't force yourself, because everybody can feel it.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think too, like I had some guests. I had one woman who was actually somebody I knew through my writing group, and she prepared for that interview like it was finals week. Right? Like it was like, brrr, and it was so, you could feel the tension, through the lines. And I was like, you really just need, it's a conversation, right? Like it's just a conversation, and you have to just kind of relax. So yeah, no, I definitely had the gamut. But I think what was really cool about the podcast is, because a lot of times, like I hadn't read the books and I didn't know the people, a lot of people started reaching out to me. And it was always kind of, like it was like a box of chocolates, like you never knew what surprise you were going to get. And sometimes I had the most like amazing connections with people, like we would find, as we were talking, we had something in our backgrounds. Like I remember I had one author, and her dad was from Haiti. And so she talked about the immigrant experience, and my mother's from Ireland. So again, I'm first generation. And we were talking about how that impacts our writing, right? Like a lot of her characters were Haitian, first generation Americans. And so we, you would have thought like we really didn't have that much in common, but we actually had a ton in common. And so, I had another person, they were from Brooklyn, and I was born in Brooklyn. And then we just kind of went off there. And then other times I've had people where I go into it thinking, oh, wow, we're about the same age. We're both lawyers. Like we're going to have such a great, connection. And it's like one of those 25-minute podcasts that we have to hang up because it just wasn't going anywhere. So it's definitely not easy, and it takes like a lot of emotion and a lot of organization too. So, I definitely will pick it up again. I think just not right now.
Well, you let us know when you do, because we'd love to have you back on again, also with your new book, because you're tons of fun. Yeah, I say that because I've worked with many lawyers, and they're not always tons of fun.
No, most of them are not. I'm like the anti-lawyer.
I call them robot lawyers, because a lot of them seem like robot lawyers. Like you're going to get this response, or they're going to do the pause thing. It's fun. I did HR for many, many, many years, so worked with people, and sometimes humor is lost in that particular thing. I find that to be true with doctors too. I'm very fortunate to have some doctors that really get my humor, and then I'll, quote movie lines to my doctors, and they're like, what? I called one of them, who's my ear doctor. I hope he's not listening, but he's got red hair. I call him Dr. Weasley, and that's not his name. And somehow after waking up from a surgery he did for me, I referred to him many times as Dr. Weasley. It frustrated the crap out of him, but I was like, oh, it's Harry Potter and I like it. Anyway, okay. Bernadette, shameless self-promotion time. Let's talk about your books, where to find you, all of that stuff.
Well, you can find everything on my website, BernadetteWalsh.com. I'm on, even though I'm not the best tweeter, I am on Twitter, B Walsh Writer. I'm also on Instagram, but all of my, and actually I'm very active on my Facebook page, so, you know, anything you go into my website, you can find wherever I am. You know, as I said, I have about 12 books. I have paranormal romance, I have a contemporary romance, and then traditional women's fiction is probably my bread and butter.
Oh, cool. And what is the latest book?
It's the book I was referring to before. Unfortunately, I don't have a hard copy of it with me. I've sold them all, but it's called Safe Distance, and I really, really love it. It's such a cool book. It's about, you know, again, two friends, kind of frenemies, whose lives just keep intersecting. Their kids are friends, the husbands are friends, and they are both kind of polar opposites, and they both kind of envy the other one because they have kind of what they don't have. And then their lives really kind of collide. And on top of it, they're in the middle of a pandemic. So they have all that going on. So it's a really, really cool book. Again, I deal with some pretty difficult topics. But again, you can get you can see the cover on my website and an excerpt as well. And if anyone's interested in, you know, a free book, I always like to give it away. So if you send me, if you go on my website and send me a message, I'd be more than happy to send one through.
Wonderful, especially if they subscribe to your newsletter, right?
Yes, if they subscribe to my newsletter, that's how you get it. So
Yes,
anyway.
Yes, shameless self-promotion. Bernadette, you have been fabulous to have on the show. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Oh, no, it's been a pleasure.
Awesome. Okay, guys, this has been Drinking with Authors. I've been your host, Erica Lance. Our sponsor today has been Skunk Brothers Spirits. I have to say it slowly. I did it again yesterday, by the way. Chalice on a call. Yeah, you'd be very happy. Replace skunk with another word. It's terrible. But DWA10 is the coupon code that you can use. My co-host has been CR Rice, and our guest has been Bernadette Walsh. And we will see you guys next time.